ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmat Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Guru Bhyo Namaha. So we're continuing on with Agamas and South Indian Vaishnavism by Dr. V. Varadachari of French Indological Institute of Pondicherry, and we came to, I think, chapter 8. So this is chapter 8. We're going to start with Agamas and Vaishnava literature. The previous chapter was all about different samhitas and the contents of different samhitas. So if anybody wants to know about that, go back and look at the previous video. And there's also some other places where we can find out about some of those samhitas are actually translated into English. And there's also a descriptive bibliography by H. Daniel Smith, which is also available. Get in touch with me by text or by email, and we can give you a link to download those things to give you more information on the contents of the Pancharatra Samhitas. So now this chapter is going to be about Pancharatra Agamas and other Vaishnava literature and how they perhaps interface. So the system of Agamas and Vaishnava literature, chapter 8, the system of Vishishta Dvaita, which is a Vedantic system of Ramanuja, which means Vishishta Dvaita means holistic monism or specific monism in a particular way, but not in other ways, represents the philosophical side of Vaishnavism. So Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta is the philosophical side. The term came to be used to refer to a system of philosophy which is based primarily on the Upanishads and was developed by a long line of writers like Bodhayana. Ramanuja talks about going into Kashmir with Kurudalwan and reading Bodhayana's Vritti, Bodhayana's commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, and then developing his Srivasya from that. Nathamuni, Yamunacharya, and Ramanuja. So people who have written on the Upanishads. Because of its tenets, that is Vishishta Dvaita, it was referred to by expressions like Vishishta Dravyaika. Well, Dravya means things, Vishishta means specific, Dravya means things, and Aikya means oneness, the oneness of things, the specific oneness of things, we can say. Or Dravyaika, or others. So these are different expressions, terminology or jargon for Vishishta Dvaita. Sudarshana Suri is also called, he wrote a commentary called, a commentary on Ramanuja's Srivasya, which is very, very important. And he lived at the same time as Vedanta Deshika and died in one of the Muslim raids on Sri Rangam. 1300 AD. He's also called Shruta Prakashika Acharya because the name of the commentary on Srivasya that he wrote is Shruta Prakashika. So Sudarshana Suri was the earliest writer to use the expression Vishishta Dvaita to refer to the system. As philosophy, the system of Vaishnavism grew and developed on the triple foundations of the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. So just like all the other Vedantic philosophies in India, the system of explaining Vedanta comes about, and Shankara really sort of codified this. It comes about by understanding the commentaries on the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. These three texts are called the Prasthana Trayi, or the Prasthana Traya, the three Prasthanas or main texts. Basic texts. Upanishads, meaning basically the first 10 Upanishads, although it could be on any Upanishad. First 10 or 12 are considered most important, and then Brahma Sutras, the sutra forms that give the philosophical meaning that is given in the Upanishads in a distinctive order, in a set order, in a chronological sort of order of discussion and systematic order. And because the discussion of different philosophical points in the Upanishads is all over the place, it's not systematic. So the Brahma Sutras makes it systematic, and the Bhagavad Gita is also quite systematic. And the Bhagavad Gita, of course, is from the Mahabharata. There's one other text which all of the different acharyas of different systems of Vedanta and different sampradayas have commented on, as that is also the Vishnu Sahasranam, which also comes from Mahabharata, like Bhagavad Gita. So the Puranas, notably the Vishnu Purana, right, having been authored by the father of Vedavyasa, Parasara Muni, whereas the other Puranas, the other 17 Puranas, were authored by Vedavyasa. The Vaishnava Agamas, the Vaikhanasa and the Pancharatra Agamas, right? So those are the two different Vaishnavas, and the Nalaya Divya Prabandham in Tamil provide the basis for the growth of the religious aspect. Okay, so we have the philosophical aspect, which comes from the Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, and Bhagavad Gita. And maybe also the philosophy given to us in the commentaries on Vishnu Sahasranam. And then we have the religious aspect coming from the Puranas, specifically Vishnu Purana, Vaishnava Agamas, like Vaikhanasa and Pancharatra, and also the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, which is the Tamil 4,000 hymns of the Alwars. Philosophy with its theory and religion with its practice have blended harmoniously to give rise to a system, call it a creed or by any other name, which provided suffering humanity with the means to get over the ills of the world and lead a happy and prosperous life here and in the hereafter. So the philosophical basis has not been free from the religious tinge, and the foundations of its religion have a philosophical background. Okay, so the philosophy without religion, religion without philosophy. So we have some religions like Christianity and Islam, Judaism, they don't really have a philosophical basis, but they're just religion. And then you have some religions which don't really have some philosophies which really don't have a religion. So you have religions without much philosophy, and you have philosophies without much religion. So like Advaita and Sankhya and these sort of things, these schools of thought are philosophies, but they have no religious aspect. Vishishtadvaita, on the other hand, right, not like Advaita, is both a religion, but it also has a basis in philosophy. So we could call it a philosophy of religion or a religion of philosophy. So the philosophical basis has not been freed from the religious tinge, and the foundations of its religion have a philosophical background. Vaishnavism has a glorious heritage which did not discard either the philosophical or the religious background. It is a result of a synthesis of an ecstatic and rapturous experience of the bewitching beauty of God, like the Alwars had when they saw different forms of God, and they were inspired to write their poetic Nalaya Divya Prabandham in Tamil, and the intellectual insight into the problems of reality. Thus, neither was reason undermined, nor emotion given the soul. He says here burial. Okay. So there's a good correlationship between these two things, intellect and emotion. Brahman, the supreme, right, which is qualified by the sentient and insentient beings, is called Bhagavan. He's also called Narayana, Vasudeva, Narayana, and Vishnu in Vaishnavism. Nothing exists outside of Brahman, right? Brahman itself, the word means the biggest or the greatest, while everything exists as his mode or attribute. Everything is related to him as his quality, his mode, his attribute. And it is only by admitting this that the names of Bhagavan and others become meaningful. These names occur frequently in the Agamas and the Vishnu Purana. Their full significance is brought out in the Agamas. The Vishnu Purana does offer explanations for the use of these with reference to God. Whether this work is indebted to the Agamas or vice versa is a problem that cannot be solved now for want of adequate evidence. So we don't really know the age of the Vishnu Purana and the Agamas, which influenced each other. Whether this work is indebted or vice versa, we don't know. Right. So a synthesis was effected by treating Brahman as identical with Bhagavan, Vasudeva, Narayana, and Vishnu. As a result of this, Brahman came to be looked upon as Saguna, and among the qualities, 6, Jnana, Virya, Bala, Aishwarya, Shakti, and Tejas are considered outstanding. So these are the outstanding. This is what we talked about before. It's the Sadgunyas, or the Sadgunyas of Bhagavan. The 6 attributes: Jnana, Virya, Bala, Aishwarya, Shakti, and Tejas. So knowledge, Virya is prowess, Bala is strength, Aishwarya is opulence, right? Shakti is power, and Tejas is also power. Okay, so still, God is considered as having countless qualities, right? We say Parasha Shakti Vividaya Shriyate, that the Supreme has unlimited qualities and attributes, auspicious qualities, on the strength of the Puranic and epic descriptions. While God is required to have a body, according to these latter sources, right, the Puranas and epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata, in order to justify his several names, the Agamas remain content to recognize the ultimate reality as having a body in the form of these 6 qualities that we just mentioned. The negative references, which amounted to an interpretation of them as representing the absence of defects in God, give rise to the evolution of another concept, namely the absence of those qualities which are fit to be avoided. So in other words, he has all these positive qualities, these 6 positive qualities in full, and also many other positive qualities, but he doesn't have any negative qualities. That's the other point. So to say that God has these 6 qualities doesn't mean he also has bad qualities. No, he has all the good qualities and he has none of the bad qualities. In this, the Agamas have played a significant role, of course, following the line of treatment in the Upanishads. This aspect of Sagunaiva, right, of Brahman, so Brahman with qualities, is found in the Pancharatra alone. It has influenced Ramanuja in describing Brahman as opposed to all that is to be avoided, and a storehouse of multitude of natural and countless auspicious qualities of unlimited excellence. So here he's giving a quotation from Vedanta Sangraha. So Vedanta Sangraha is one of the 9 books of Ramanuja, and probably the first of his books, and it deals with the message of the Upanishads, but in a very condensed form. So an important, so Veda Artha Sangraha, bringing together Sangraha, the Artha, the meaning of the Vedas, or the philosophical meaning of the Vedas, of course, is in the Upanishads. An important feature in the treatment of Brahman is the Agama, in the Agama, is that he is ever associated with Shri. So Bhagavan or Sriman Narayana is always associated with Mahalakshmi or Sri Devi. Shri is Shakti, the Shakti or the power latent or hidden there in Brahman. Both have full powers to create, protect, and destroy the world. Okay, so Dr. V. Varadachari, the author here, is a Wadagalai. So this is actually something which is one of the differences between Wadagalais and Tengalais is that here he says that both Sriman Narayana and Lakshmi Devi, Sri Devi, have the full powers to create, protect, and destroy the world. Okay, whereas the Tengalai Acharyas, the southern school of Sri Vaishnavism, would say actually only the Supreme Lord has that, and Sri Devi is also in a position subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and she doesn't have the power to create or destroy or maintain the world like that. Both have overlordship. Actually, it's a very academic question, because even the Wadagalais, although they say this, that she can create and maintain and destroy the worlds or universes like that, they don't give an example of her actually doing that, because they say because she's subordinate to the Supreme Lord, she will always let her husband do that, the Supreme Person. So it's just an academic discussion there. So it's a very small difference between the water goddess and ten goddess, but that's the difference. The two become a single reality, as it were, since God cannot be ever disassociated from Shakti. Brahman is said to be non-dual. So in this sense, non-dualism or monism means that God is one with his qualities and his attributes, and here represented by Sri Devi. But he has other attributes and other qualities as well. Okay, so now this is a quotation from Lakshmi Tantra in the 16th chapter, 24th verse. Okay, so this is not Advaita. So there's a difference between the monism of Advaita, which is absolute, and this type of monism, Vishishta Advaita, which is not absolute. So for the latter, nothing exists apart from Brahman, right? So in Advaita, nothing exists apart from Brahman. Brahman alone is true, and everything else is false. But here, Shakti, or the power of God, right, or Shri, exists in Brahman. She is not noticed when there is no creation, but is made known as distinct from Brahman when there is creation. The existence of Shakti in an explicit state is not denied. And so this is a two-in-one reality, when both Vishnu and Shri are held as equal in the possession of auspicious qualities and become the refuge of the selves, of the souls. There is not much difficulty in explaining the passages in Lakshmi Tantra or Ahibudnya Samhita, which glorify Sri Devi as having full responsibility for everything. Okay. On the transcendental plane, Vishnu and Shri form a unit as a philosophical principle, but they are referred to as Dharmin and Dharma, Bhava and Bhavat, Ahanta and Aham, right? So they're referred to as separate parts, but what he's saying is that we think of them as one, basically, as the divine couple. So Shakti and Shri cannot be considered, Shakti or Shri can be considered as an attribute of Vishnu. The two are inseparable and so are treated as a single principle. Shri can therefore be taken, that's why we say Sriman Narayana always, like that. We have in the Dvaya mantra, Sriman Narayana Charano Sharam Bhavati, Srimate Narayana Namaha. So most notably, Sri Vaishnavas, whenever we say Narayana, we always say Sriman Narayana, because we always associate Lakshmi with Sriman, with Narayana. So Shakti and Shri can be considered as an attribute of Vishnu. The two are inseparable and treated as one single principle. Shri can therefore be taken as prompting or acting as an accessory to Vishnu in creation and other functions. Ahanta and such other expressions disclose the self-luminous nature of Shri, and so, like an attribute to the substance having it, she acts and brings credit not to herself but to Vishnu. In this way, the attribution of one's function to the other must be understood. He's given another verse here from second chapter, 17 and 18th verse of Lakshmi Tantra. So Vishnu is the husband of Shri, and as such, both could be treated as a unit as in any Vedic ritual. This concept has developments in the Puranas and epics. So the Vishishtadvaita concept of Brahman is associated with Vishnu and Shri, as associated with Vishnu and Shri, is being recognized as the divine couple. The compositions of the Alvars ascribe to this view. So the Siddhi Traya, which are the three books written by Yamunacharya. So you have Samvat Siddhi. I forget the names of the books. Anyway, there's three, right? Because it says Traya, 3 cities: Samvat Siddhi, Ishvara Siddhi, and I forget the last one. Okay, so has the word Srimati as an adjective to Purusha. So Srimati represents Lakshmi, obviously. Purusha means the Supreme Person in this case. In the benedictory stanza, Yamuna's Chatusloki. So Yamuna has written 4 verses on Sri Devi, on Mahalakshmi, and they call the Chatusloki. Is in sole praise of Sri. So Ramanuja's use of the words Srinivasa, Nivasa means the place of Sri. So Srinivasa is the abode of Sri. Sri is situated on the chest of the Lord as a Srivatsa. So Srinivasa and Shriyapatihi, the Lord of Sri, right, frequently in his works. So Yamuna speaks about Sri Devi, so does Ramanuja, right, in their works. And he's given lots of quotes there. The concept of Lakshmi, developed in the Lakshmi Tantra and the Ahirbunya Samhita, is not admitted as such in the Vishishtadvaita system. She does anything only at his command. Some thinkers glorify Shri, heightening her greatness at the expense of Vishnu's eminence. It is therefore essential to be cautious in interpreting the passages about her in the Pancharatric texts. And this is what the Tengalaya Acharyas will also say, that there's a lot of praise that is heaped on Shri, but Shri is in between the Jivas and the Supreme Lord. She acts as a mediatrix or a mediator, and she is therefore called a Purushakara, like that. So just like we can look on, we can look at the relationship between God and Sri Devi, or the Narayana and Sri Devi, and the Jivas, the rest of the souls, sort of like a family. So she's our divine mother, right? And she's also the divine consort of the Supreme Lord, right? And they're both like the parents, and we're like the children. So in one sense, like the Wadagalais, they emphasize more the parental relationship of Sri Devi and Sri Narayana, right? Whereas the Tengalais will be emphasizing more the fact that both her and her and the children are both subordinate to the father. She's not the father; she's the mother. So the mother is the consort, is the wife, and is subordinate to the husband, like that. Okay, it may sound patriarchal, but anyway, it's the point is just the analogy of this, to understand the analogy of the relationship. It is therefore essential to be cautious when interpreting passages about her in Pancharatric texts. Okay, so even in Vishnu Purana, even in Lakshmi Tantra, we have to be cautious in the way we interpret the texts about her. So in this context, it's relevant to refer to the place of Shri in Vaishnavism subsequent to the period of Ramanuja. So what was the place of Lakshmi or Shri in Vaishnavism before this? The Tengalai school holds that Shri is a self, as a soul, like she's far greater than the others, but she has a greater position. But she's not God. She's not equal to God. The consort of Vishnu, ever associated with him. She is referred to as the mediatrix for the self to win the favor of God. Without her mediation, none can get God's favor. This must be understood in the light of the role that an ideal wife plays in favor of her children. The Agamas too lend support to this aspect of Lakshmi. If Shri were to be on an equal footing with Vishnu, then she cannot be the mediator. Right? The Wadagalai sect treats Shri and Vishnu as equal for all purposes and as the parents of the world. She is not only a mediator, but also fit to be attained even as Vishnu is. There is no need to exaggerate one view at the expense of another, right? So both of these views have some validity, right? A woman has a dual role to play as wife and mother. The two sects have different approaches towards the place of Shri, which deserve due appreciation. If it will become prudent to avoid vehemence in criticizing either view with the intention of maintaining one's standpoint. So we should appreciate both of these views. It is needless, therefore, to raise the issue as to which view is more correct. The significance of Vishishtadvaita is explained as non-duality or oneness of Brahman, which is qualified by the sentient and insentient beings which form its body, right? So everything that exists is considered the body of God, and all of the other beings are considered to be part of the body of God, right? So that's one thing. And at the same time, he also enters within those things and pervades those things from inside. Another explanation is that in this system, the cause of the world, namely Brahman, with the sentient and insentient beings in its subtle state, is not different from the effect, namely the world which is Brahman in its gross state, with sentient and insentient beings. The Vedantins cite the well-known passage from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad to support the relation of the body and the soul between the created beings and Brahman in order to fortify the Vishishtadvaita view. So now there are several views in Vedanta, okay? So Madhva has this idea that the world and the souls are separate from God. They're separate from God. They were not created from God or by God, right? So the thing is, creation still goes on in a way by the will of the Lord, but he's like the potter who makes a pot out of clay, but he's not the clay himself. Whereas in Ramanuja's system, in the system of Vishishtadvaita, we accept that not only is the world created by God, but it is created out of God. It is God, right? Everything is God, right? So he's not only the material, he's not only the efficient cause, the one that creates the world, but he's also the material cause out of which the world is created. Okay, so the concept of Brahman as advocated in the Agamas admits of Shakti's emergence from Brahman and disappearance within it at the time of dissolution. From Shakti, both the sentient and insentient beings emerge at creation. Those selves which do not get released during dissolution enter into Shakti. During both the periods of creation and dissolution, Brahman alone exists, the created world being only the manifested condition of Shakti. So the oneness or Advaita of Brahman remains forever undisturbed. The selves lie there in both the states, so in the waking state or in the state of Sushupti, which is very covered type of coma type sleep at the time of dissolution. If somebody doesn't go to become liberated in moksha and go to the supreme abode of the Lord, then the soul will be just in a state of suspension, right, until the creation is made again. That's called Sushupti. So this appears to be sufficient for explaining the concept of Vishishtadvaita. If it is remembered that Shakti is only an attribute of Brahman, the exponents of Vishishtadvaita have not considered this aspect of the Agamas concept of Brahman, nor is there any clue in the Agamas to support the relation of body and soul between Brahman and the world of matter and selves. So this idea of what's called Sharira Shariri Bhava, that the relationship between the Lord and everything else is like a soul and a body, the big God being the soul and the universe of selves and matter being like the body, right? This concept is not found in the Agamas, but it is found in, as he said, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is one of the most oldest Upanishads. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is where that's found. And there's some other places in the Upanishads where this concept is found, Sharira Shariri Bhava. Okay, and it's a unique aspect that Ramanuja has brought out this idea. He's given this idea, expounded and preached this idea from the Upanishads, because other schools of thought have said we can't understand. We know that everything's not all one in an Advaitic sense, and we know that everything's not all completely different. There is a relationship, some relationship between God, the souls, and the world, but we don't exactly know how to explain it. For example, in the Gaudiya Vaishnava system, they say it's inconceivable. We don't know. We can't understand it completely with our minds, so we don't even try to explain it. We just say it's inconceivable, which is also, the Advaitins also have a system where they say that too. Also, sometimes they say we can't conceive of it like that. Ramanuja says, no, you can't fully conceive of it, but here's an analogy, the body-soul relationship analogy, which is in the Upanishads, right? Which can help you to have the concept of the relationship. You won't understand it fully, but this is an analogy that'll help you. So Ramanuja doesn't say you can't understand it. He just says, of course, you can't understand it fully, perhaps, but you can understand, you can get an idea of it from this analogy of Sharira Shariri Bhava. So during the periods of creation and dissolution, Brahman alone exists, the created world being only the manifested condition of Shakti. So the oneness of Advaita remains undisturbed. Right, the selves lie in both those states. This appears to be sufficient for explaining the concept of Vishishtadvaita. Right, so the exponents of Vishishtadvaita have not considered this aspect of the Agamas concept of Brahman, nor is there any clue in the Agamas to support the relation of body and soul between Brahman and the world of matter and the selves. The Agamic concept stated above regarding Brahman offers an explanation in support of treating him as both the material and the instrumental cause of the world. This is what I was just saying. Brahman is not separate from Shakti. Whatever changes take place in Shakti must be admitted to take place in the Dharmin, namely in Brahman. If it could be admitted that Shakti is inanimate, then Brahman can be taken as the instrumental cause also. Since Shakti is the same as Lakshmi and so animate, the Shakti gets transformed into Prakriti, meaning material nature, and it's evolutes, right? So from the Sankhya idea of creation, Prakriti evolves into different forms of matter and either gross and subtle. Subtle first and then gross. Okay, so it would be better to take Shakti as the material instrument and instrumental causes of the world. Whatever Shakti does may be ascribed to Brahman. Thus, the theory of causation stands explained. The concept of the freedom of Brahman from limitations in regard to time, space, and objects has support in the Ariyabhunya Samhita, where a passage describes this limitlessness in the variety of ways. The Vyuha, Vibhava, and other aspects of God's existence have been incorporated into the Vishishtadvaita system. In this connection, it becomes difficult to explain what inspired the glorious descriptions of God in the Vishishtadvaita works, as there is not much in the Pancharatra Vaikhanasa texts that could have evoked it. Both the Agama texts describe how the idol or the icon that is to be made should look like, the weapons it must hold, the ornaments and postures. The methods of constructing the temple structures to serve as shrines for the deities are dealt with in elaborate detail. The Nalaya Divya Prabandham, the 4,000 Tamil songs of the Alwars, which bears the influence of the Agamas, does not contain much to account for these descriptions, but the poetic imagery in the composition of the Alwars could have suggested the descriptions in ornate style. Besides these, there is the Jitante Stotra. Jitante Stotra starts Jitante with the Jitante Stotra is chanted when we go into the temple and we pay obeisances. We do Astanga Pranamas at the Dwajastamba before entering the temple. Jitante Pundari Kaksha, Namaste Vishwabhavana, Namaste Sturishikesha, Mahapurusha Purvaja is the first verse of this Jitanta Stotra, which is known by Pancharatrans. It's a part of temple worship. It's considered also very important stotra, which is written in a classical manner that reminds us of the passages in the Bhagavad Purana, right? The Narayaniya section of the Mahabharata, Jitante Stotra comes from the Agamas. The Narayaniya section of the Mahabharata contains only the opening verse of this stotra, which I just chanted. It is also doubtful whether this stotra was then available in full in the Mahabharata, let's say. So the entire work in 6 sections could have been composed later, keeping that stanza at the beginning. So we don't know. So the Stotra Ratna we've been through, and if anybody wants to know, we have done a commentary. We've gone through the commentary of Perivachan Pillai, Great Acharya, on Stotra Ratna, which is the about 64 verses on the Supreme Lord. Notice that even Yamunacharya has written 64 verses on the Supreme Lord and only 4 verses on Lakshmi, right? So the idea that to equate Lakshmi and the Supreme Lord is not exactly borne out by his emphasis of 64 verses on the Lord and 4 verses on Lakshmi. But in any case, not to get back to that argument, but the Stotra Ratna, and we have the lessons, about I think 100 lectures by Dr. Tirunarayana on the YouTube channel here. And there's a different playlist. If you look for the playlist that says Stotra Ratnam, there's the classes on Stotra Ratnam, which you can look at. In the Stotra Ratnam, which is an early devotional lyric of Yamunacharya, it contains a wealth of stanzas noteworthy for poetic excellence and emotional appeal. Its author appears to have been indebted to the Jitante Stotra, which we just talked about, which the first part is there in Mahabharata, but is fully there in 6 parts in the Pancharatra Agama. Likewise, the Gajyatraya is also three more prose works of Ramanuja. Ramanuja had 6 works: Vedanta Sangraha, Sri Bhasya, Gita Bhasya, Vedanta Sara, and Vedanta Deepa. So 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra, 1 commentary on Bhagavad Gita, 1 commentary on the Upanishads, and on the gist of the Upanishads, and then 3 prose works, Sharanagati Gadya, Sri Ranga Gadya, and Vaikuntha Gadya, right, about Vaikuntha, Sri Rangam, and surrender, the process of surrender. Not particularly in that order, right? These are the 9 works of Ramanuja. So like the Gajyatraya, these 3 prose works on the surrender, on Sri Rangam, and on Vaikuntha of Ramanuja, which are prose works, and his introduction to the Bhagavad Gita Bhasya, his commentary on Bhagavad Gita, present grand pictures of the appearance of the Lord. So he's described the Divya Mangala Vigraha, the divine form of the Lord that shows unlimited auspicious qualities and no negative qualities. All these were not definitely inspired by Agama texts. While the Agamas speak of only the 6 qualities, many more qualities which glorify God's attempts to endear himself to his devotees are described in a charming way in the works of Ramanuja, in these works of Ramanuja. So in the Stotra Ratna by Yamuna, in these Gajyatraya by Ramanuja, you'll find very, very elaborate descriptions of all of the wonderful qualities of the Supreme Lord. It is quite possible that the Alwaz compositions, which depict the glory of the Archa form, of the deity form in the temple, right, owed much to the Agamas, although in contents there is not much in common between the Agamas and these poems. So he's contrasting in this chapter, he's contrasting all of these literatures, these other literatures, with the Agamas. There is not anything special in the Agamas regarding the individual self, which could have impressed the exponents of Vishishtadvaita. However, it is possible that the property doctrine, the doctrine of Sharanagati or surrender, right, also called Nyasa Vidya in the Upanishads, right, gained admission into Vishishtadvaita as a result of the influence of the Tiruvaimoli, which is the main magnum opus of Namalwa, his greatest work, which is over 1,100 verses. So, which in turn was inspired by the treatment of this doctrine in the Pancharatra Agama texts. So they're all related and interwoven here, particularly in the Lakshmi Tantra and Ahabudnya Samhita, which we just talked about in the last chapter. Perhaps this influence did not allow scope of the paths of Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. And the Bhakti way also suffered the same fate, though not to the extent of the other 2, right? So Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga were completely disregarded, right? Bhakti was still accepted. Bhakti Yoga is still accepted as a path, especially by the Vadagalai Vaishnavas, but nobody practices it practically. So it's accepted as a means to moksha, a direct means to moksha, but nobody practices it because the path of property is so easy and so quick, like that. So in this respect, the Vaikhanasa Agama, which evoked only the yoga way, did not command attention, right? So that's why the Pancharatra became more influential, because of this this relationship of that it teaches also about property. Regardless of the state of release, right, the state of moksha or whatever it is, a state of release, the Agamas describe it as related to the highest place, Paramapada. So we find even in the Veda we have Vishnoya Paramam Padam. So Vishnu's in the highest place, Paramapada, right? It is made of non-sattva, non-material sattva, so not matter, but pure sattva, pure goodness, like that, representing, as it were, solidified splendor. That's what the spiritual world is made of. It is clear and flawless, and it provides limitless bliss. Enjoyments there are blissful, regions are blissful, and the bodies of the selves which attain are filled, as it were, with knowledge and bliss. The Lord's body is made up of the 6 qualities that we mentioned before. It's difficult to describe that place. The selves do not suffer from any defect in their senses, and they take no food. In describing the attractiveness of the region which the released souls reach after death, the exponents of Vishishtadvaita have displayed much ingenuity and imagination. They depict the ideal world made up of non-material sattva, or pure goodness. The mansions and halls, quadrangles, parks, and pleasure ponds are all pictured as magnificent, the like of which could not exist anywhere. It is called the eternally manifest glory of the Lord, right? So it's called Nitya Vibhuti, right? Whereas this place is called Leela Vibhuti, the place he comes to do Leela, right? Or it's his Leela, right? The Lord is there, attended by numberless selves, eternally free and released. So we have two different types of souls there. We have those that were in this material world and have become freed and gone to moksha, gone to liberation. They are called the muktas. They've attained moksha or mukti, liberation. And then we have the nityas, those who are eternally there, right? Sometimes called nityasiddhas, but those who are eternally there, who've never come to this material world. Okay, so this kind of description is in Ramanuja's Vaikuntha Gadya. So we mentioned that one of the 3 Gadyas is Vaikuntha Gadya, description of Vaikuntha. And in the Nitya Vibhuti sections of Nyasa Siddhanjana of Vedanta Deshika and various other works by others. Okay, so we can look at, if we want a description of Vaikuntha, we can look there in those places. The literature of Vishishtadvaita is vast and varied in form. As far as their dealings with the Agamas are concerned, some works are in the form of stotras. Stotras means hymns of praise. Some discuss the validity of the Agamas, and some others are in the form of manuals of religious practices, particularly the modes of worship. Right? So there's also some literature like that. The doctrines of the Pancharatra are found recorded for the first time in the Narayaniya section of the Shanti Parva, right, of the Mahabharata, right? The Vishnu Purana is the earliest text to treat of Godhead against the background of the Pancharatra doctrines. Vishnu, Narayana, Bhagavan, Vasudeva are the names of the Supreme Deity. He has 6 qualities and is free from defects. He has a form made up of powers which take the shape of the universe. Shri is ever with him and is all pervasive like him, right? So that's another difference between the Vadagalais and Tengalais, is both sects say that Shri is all pervasive, but in what way is she all pervasive? The Vadagalais say that she is exactly in the same way as God, as Sriman Narayana. She is pervasive. Her swarupa, her essential nature is all pervasive, just like God's essential nature is all pervasive. The Tengalai Acharyas, or the Southern school, say she is all pervasive by her attribute, like her attributes of all knowing, all knowledge, omniscience. So because of being omniscient, she can understand what is going on in any place. Like that, she can be therefore appear to be with the Supreme Lord everywhere, right? She can appear to be omnipresent because she's omniscient, like that. So that is called guna vyapti, whereas the other one is called swarupa vyapti, being all pervasive by your essence, by your essential nature. Then the Gunavyapti doctrine is the Tengalite doctrine of being all pervasive by qualities. So she grants the fruits of moksha, right? So this is also understood by the Vatagalites that she directly grants moksha or directly grants the fruits of moksha. The Tengalite say, no, she doesn't directly grant the fruits of moksha, but she's also essential as a mediator, right, to attain moksha. Shri and Vishnu are the divine couple, and none is superior to them. The highest place is full of knowledge, pure and imperishable. The Vyuha theory is well known and gets frequent references giving the names of the four deities, Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. Right, so that's we're talking about in the Narayaniya section of the Mahabharata and in the Vishnu Purana. Yeah. Okay, so there are other Puranas which refer to the Pancharatra doctrines. Some, however, condemn them. The Bhagavad Purana contains reference to the Agama mode of worship, types of archa or deity forms in the temples, and the advantages of worship, of adopting this form of worship. The Vyuha forms, when he says that there are some Puranas, there are also Rajasic and Tamasic Puranas. So we have like the Devi Bhagavata Purana, which sort of decries the use of Pancharatra doctrines. But those Puranas are for people in the mode of ignorance, and some are for the mode of passion. But the Sattvic Puranas, like the Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu Purana, which are being mentioned here, speak very highly of the Pancharatric doctrines. So the Bhagavad contains references to the Agama mode of worship, types of archa forms, and advantages of adopting this kind of worship. The Vyuha forms of God are also referred to in the Bhagavad Purana. Bhakti receives prominent treatment here in the Bhagavad Purana, and Prapati also is extolled as a means of salvation. And he gives a quote here. Okay, so we could look that up and see what's the quote in the Bhagavad Purana about Prapati, or surrender. The Jitanta Stotra, or the Jitante Stotra, which is held as fit for recitation during the 5 times during the day when God is to be worshipped, right? So there are these 5 times of day when we do the worship in the temple, is a perfect Pancharatric work. So it's a very good thing to learn. The first stanza is given as detailed exposition in the Ahirbuddha Samhita, and this is proof that it was composed before this Samhita. The later stanzas in the 6 sections could have been composed later. It advocates property or surrender to God. God is said to have no form which can serve to identify him, yet he presents himself to his devotees in a human form. There is devout fervor throughout this work, that is the Chitante Stotra, and it is likely that it was composed under the influence of the works like the Bhagavad Purana. This hymn contains a glorious description of the highest place, that is Sri Vaikuntham, or Nitya Vibhuti, the appearance of the Lord there, the Sadgunya, right, the 6 amazing qualities, Vyuhas, right, the Panchakala, right, we talked about before, the 5 times of day and the different activities to be gone through, and the Sayuja, which is the type of liberation which is considered the highest, to be in very close proximity worshiping the Supreme Lord, kind of the Sayuja kind of communion in moksha, and the 5 forms of God. Remember the 5 forms of God in the Pancharatra: Paravyuha, Vibhava, Antaryama, and Archa. Okay, so one should the last section gives a beautiful description of the Lord with all materials necessary to offer worship to him. One should wish for the conduct of daily, fortnightly, monthly festivals with all the attendant music and several kinds of food preparations. The devotees must attend on him and render service to him by offering whatever valuable possessions he has and can procure. There must be desire for this spiritual atmosphere to continue for years. This section is based on both the Pancharatra and Vaikhanasa Agamas, which treat these aspects of duties and services. The Nalaya Divya Prabandham, which contains the spontaneous outpourings of God-intoxicated divine saints called the Alwars, right, speaks of the Lord's glory in various ways. The Supreme Being is formless and has unsurpassed bliss and countless qualities. Yet he takes the forms in which his devotees wish to visualize him. The Vyuha doctrine is referred to directly and also through the colors which God assumes in each yuga. So there are different avatars in different yugas, and they come in different colors. The divine descents are graphically depicted. Frequent references are made to the Antaryamin, or the supersoul, the Paramatman aspect of God, which is also one of the 5 forms, right? Numerous are the descriptions of the Archa, or the deity form in the temples, enshrined in many temples of India. The initiatory rites of Panchasamskara, the 5 holy purificatory ceremonies that every Vaishnava goes into to become officially a Vaishnava, Tapa Pundra Tonama Mantra Yagasya Panchamaha, those 5 samskaras, in its aspect of receiving the marks of the conch and the discus branded on the body, which the Pancharatric system enjoins, is referred to also in Nalaya Divya Prabandham, and also the Astakshari, right, or the 8-syllable mantra, Om Namo Narayana, and the Dwarasakshari, or the 12-syllable mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All of those are there explained in the, or mentioned in the Nalaya Divya Prabandham of the Alwars. The doctrine of property arose on the foundations of Bhagavad Gita. Why does he say this? Because in Bhagavad Gita we find Krishna says, Sarva Dharmam Parityaja, Mamekam Sharanam Bhaja, Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyo, Mokshayishyami Masuchaha, which is considered the Krishna Charma Sloka, or the final order of Lord Krishna, which explains property or surrender unto the Lord as the means to liberation. So the doctrine of property arose on the foundations of Bhagavad Gita. It also comes from the Nyasa Vijaya and the Upanishads, yet it gets its exposition in the Pancharatra Agamas. It was actually practiced by the Alwars. So they did it practically. They surrendered to the Lord, who thus reveal the agamic influence. The compositions of the Alwars refer to the forms of the Mula bearer, or the main immovable deity, in various shrines, and also to the conduct of festivals in those shrines. The public festivals, which include processions. So here's a little bit of a footnote here. He says the compositions of the Alwars depict the deities in the temples in their Dhruva form, meaning the immovable form, the Mula bearer. This does not mean that the other forms were not known to them. The Agamas and customary worship give primary importance to the Dhruva bearer, or the main Mula bearer form of the deity, and the other forms take a secondary place. The icons other than those in the Dhruva form and are also referred to by the Alwars. So he gives a list of certain places in the Nalaya Divya Prabandham where they talk about the Utsava Murtis, the other different types of Murtis. And remember, there were 6. There can be up to 6, right, in Pancharatric temples. And the temples which are better have more, and the temples which are not so great, they have less, even 1 or 2 or 3. Yeah, so remember it was mentioned last time. So the processions that go in through the streets as part of the include the festivals. Public festivals include processions through the streets. Are described with reference to the icon called the Utsava bearer, or the festival deity, the smaller movable deity, the Chala deity. The Agamas contain elaborate procedures for conducting the installation of 5 or 6 deities in every shrine, and the principal significance is attached to the Mula bearer, or the main immovable deity, which is mostly referred to in the Alwars works. That the other deities, including the one which is taken on processions, were not current at the period of the Alwars, cannot be maintained. So that idea cannot be maintained because the Alwars also mentioned them. Besides, most of the Agamas, which were composed long before the period of the Alwars, right, refer to the installation of various kinds of deities, which should point to their actual use. Since the shrines are governed in their rituals either by the Pancharatra or Vaikhanasa Agamas, the 2 Vishnu Agamas, right, it must be admitted that the Alwars compositions bear influence on both of the Agamas. The first writer who took inspiration from the Pancharatra Agama was Yamunacharya, 916 to 1041 AD, whose Chatusloki glorifies Sri Devi or Mahalakshmi, the four verses on her. She gives shelter to all, and her glory cannot be measured by herself or even by her Lord. Her grace alone can make people remain happy while they are in bondage, and also enable them to get moksha. The entire glory of the highest place and the Lord's prosperity depends solely on her will. This hymn of praise is based on the purport of some passages in the Lakshmi Tantra and Ahibudnya Samhita, which take the word Shri in several senses. They speak of Shri as the highest deity, perhaps after a fashion of the Shakta Agamas, which raise Shakti above all, including even Shiva. The four stanzas of Yamuna offer no surprise to us, as their import is not different from that of the passages of the Samhitas referred to above. Another work of Yamuna is Stotra Ratna. In 65 stanzas, so 65 stanzas, glorifying the greatness of the Lord. One among them speaks of property as the most convenient method for getting God's protection, and refers to the paths of karma, jnana, and bhakti as hard to be practiced. The Pancharatra Agamas enjoin that food offered to God is to be offered. After food is offered to God, it's offered to Vishvaksena to avoid the sin of taking nirmalyam, right, which is also called as shesha, right? So we have smarta Brahmins who will say that you can't take the remnants of anybody, right? Sometimes you see this when people are sitting down, Brahmins are sitting down and eating in a row, that if one person stands up, all the other Brahmins have to stop eating, because everything becomes what's called uchista or shesha, right? It's leftovers. So you're not supposed to take leftovers, right? So therefore it becomes unclean like that. Now, when as Vaishnavas, all the food that we eat, we offer to the Lord. After we offer it to the Lord, it's his leftovers. We call it prasadam. But strictly speaking, according to some smarter principles, because it's leftovers, even if it's leftovers of the Lord, it can't be taken because it's considered to be nirmalya. Nirmalya is the flowers and flower garlands the next day after they've been offered to the Lord. They wilt and they fade, so they have to be taken away, and fresh ones have to be brought. So also with food, we should eat fresh food. We shouldn't eat the food which has already been eaten by somebody else, even if it's the Supreme Lord. This is the idea in by Smartas, like that. So the idea of Pancharatra Agamas enjoins that the food offered to God should be offered afterwards to Vishvaksena to avoid the sin of taking nirmalya. So instead of taking directly the nirmalya or the shesha, what is left over from the Lord, right, we offer it to Vishvaksena, and so hence Vishvaksena is called Sheshashana. Yamuna refers to Vishvaksena as attending on God and describes him as Shesha Bhojin, so the one who eats the Shesha, right? So Agamas, Yamuna's Agama Pramanya, which is the first extant work, which seeks to establish the validity of the Pancharatra Agama. So at the outset, he shows that the validity of the Agama cannot be assailed by arguments based on any pramana. So pramana is a way of proving things, right? So we have pratyaksha, sense perception, anumana, logical inference, right? And we have anumana, which is shabda, which is authoritative statement, usually coming from scriptures like that, shastra, like that. So this is the validity of Pancharatra Agama cannot be assailed. We cannot dispute it with any of these other agamas. Its validity is proved on the ground that Narayana himself revealed it. Incidentally, the Nyayayikas, the logicians' proof that God exists is examined and rejected in the Pancharatra, in the Agama Pramanya of Yamuna. The Prabhaka theory, Prabhaka was Kumarila Bhatta and Prabhaka, they were Mimamsas, they're Karmakandis, right? The Prabhaka theory of the validity only of the injunctive statements is rejected. So the Karmakandis, what they say is that there are statements in the Vedas that you have to perform a sacrifice, and it's the statement itself which is valid because it comes in the Vedas, and therefore it's not God that gives the result from doing the sacrifice, but the statement, which is most important. This is rejected by Yamunacharya. And it is shown that statements on already existent objects should also be valid. It is further shown that the Pancharatra system does not censure the Veda, right? So it's not in opposition to the Veda, the Pancharatra. So many people like Adi Shankara in his Brahma Sutra commentary of Shariraka Mimamsa, Shariraka Bhashya, he has stated that the Pancharatra is at odds with the Vedas, but Yamuna in Agama Pramanya proves that the Pancharatra is not against the Vedas. It is something that goes along with the Vedas and is in complete concordance with the Vedas. The treatment there of matters not dealt with in the Veda does not point to its invalidity. Moreover, it is admitted as valid by Bhrigu Rishi, Bharadraja Rishi, Vyasa, Vedavyasa, and others. The words Bhagavata and Sattvata are, of course, used to refer to those who follow the Pancharatra tradition and offer service in the temples. So they're called Bhagavatas or Sattvatas. Though the authors of the Smritis, like Manu and Ushanas, declare that the Bhagavatas and Sattvatas are of low origin, it must be observed that the people who are called by these names belong to the Ekayana Shaka, or the original branch, and the Vajrasaneya Yajurveda, and have Vedic study, observances, observe the sacraments, the different samskaras, and belong to Bharadvaja, Kashyapa, and other Gotras, which are highly respected, right? So like any other Brahmins. So the words also point to men of low birth, but these are distinct from the followers of Pancharatra. An analogous case is provided by the word Acharya, which is generally used to refer to a learned Brahmin, but it also denotes a lowly Vaishya. Some words convey more than one meaning. So the priests who are called Bhagavatas and Sattvatas perform worship of the Panchakalika kind, doing it 5 times a day, and those who are called by the same names attend to the cleaning of vessels, keeping the precincts of the temple free from dirt. Thus, the very same words convey occupational difference. So you might call a person a Bhagavata or a Sattvata. He might be the person who is a non-Dvija, who is cleaning the temple like that, or cleaning the vessels. Whereas you could also call the priest a Bhagavata or a Sattvata, but they have two different functions, two different services that they do. So that's his point, that when you use a word, it can mean two different things, or even more than two different things, but here two different things. Again, those Brahmins are also called Sattvatas and Bhagavatas, who are of pure character and devoted to Bhagavan. They perform worship for earning their livelihood, but out of their sense of duty. Sometimes people criticize the priests in Pancharatra temples or even Vaikhanasa temples, and they say that these people are making a livelihood out of worshiping God. But actually, it is out of a sense of duty to serve God that they do the thing, and not to make any livelihood. Yamuna takes up this in connection with the sutras of Badarayana, right? The Brahma Sutras, right? So Badarayana, sometimes Badarayana is said to be the author, and sometimes Vedavyasa is identified with Badarayana. So the sutras of Brahma Sutras 42 to 45, which are interpreted by Shankara and Bhaskara, right? Shankara is Advaitin, Bhaskara is a Beta Vadin, right? Both almost the same type of Advaita and Mayavad, right? Type school, as refuting the validity of Pancharatra Agamas. So both of these writers, these commentators, they've been against Pancharatra. He prefaces his arguments by drawing, Yamuna takes up their points, and he's going to destroy their points in his Agama Pramanya. He prefaces his arguments by drawing attention to the fact that Vyasa, who glorified the paramount validity of the Pancharatra Agama in the Mahabharata, would not have refuted it in the Brahma Sutras, which he himself composed under the name Badarayana. So Vyasa, or Badarayana as he's known, is the same person who wrote the Mahabharata and also wrote the Brahma Sutras. So how could the Brahma Sutras be against the Pancharatra when it's so clearly given in the Mahabharata by the same author that he accepts the Pancharatra Agama. So this is one argument that Yamunacharya makes in Agama Prabhanya. He assumes the identity of Vyasa with Badarayana. Therefore, he takes the first two sutras as stating the objection to the validity of Pancharatra tradition and treats the next two sutras as evidence of support for its validity. So there are four sutras in Brahma Sutras which deal with Pancharatra. So whenever you're discussing the Brahma Sutras, we have to decide which sutra is telling us what the Purva Paksha means the opponent's initial prima facie argument, which is then overridden by the Siddhanta or the final conclusion, right? So which is the prima facie argument by the opponent and which is the conclusion? So that has to be figured out. So here he's saying that the way that Yamuna says it, the first two sutras give us the prima facie reasoning of the opponent. The second two sutras answer all the questions like that. Okay. So the first two state the objection. So here's some of the objections by Bhaskara and by Adi Shankara. Sankarshana, the soul, they equate Sankarshana with the soul. Remember, we have the Chatuvyuha, Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. So they say that Sankarshana is the soul. But this is actually a misunderstanding. We'll see why. Okay, the soul cannot rise from Vasudeva. So the soul cannot arise from Vasudeva. And Pradyumna, the mind, Pradyumna represents the mind, cannot spring from an agent, Sankarshana. This objection is ruled out by Yamuna. Thus, since Vasudeva, Sankarshana, and others are only Brahman, they're all forms of Brahman, right? The Supreme Lord, right? The rise of one from another need not be objected to. Mind is, of course, an instrument, but it is not produced from Sankarshana, right? Besides, an instrument like a jar is produced by an agent, the potter. So a pot is made by a potter, right? A clay pot. And so the objection cannot stand. A second method of refuting the objection lies in treating Vasudeva, Sankarshana, and others as knowledge by virtue of their omniscience, and because knowledge is had from them. The rise of Pancharatra from them cannot be opposed, also because it is known from the Pancharatra that God has perceptual knowledge of everything, and so the rise of knowledge from them cannot be questioned. Yamuna offers an alternative exposition to the whole argument. The first sutra may mean that valid knowledge cannot rise from Pancharatra because of its validity is not itself proved, right? The second sutra means that the Vedas are not the composition of anyone, while the Pancharatra Agama is one such, which was composed by the Supreme Lord. The third sutra, which answers the objection, states that Bhagavan himself is the source of perfect knowledge, and so the rise of knowledge from the Pancharatra cannot be questioned because it's being spoken by the Lord. The last sutra declares that the prima facie view, the first view of the first sutra, right, stands contradicted because if the motive of God in composing the Pancharatra becomes questionable, then the same may be said with reference to the Vedas, the Smritis, and the Puranas, which also all emanate from God, right? So if we question one of God's, one teaching from God, we have to question all of them. Yamuna did not properly seek to establish the validity of the Vaikhanasa, but only the Pancharatra, because objections were raised only against the Pancharatra, which is treated as anti-Vedic. The Vaikhanasa Agama is admitted to be purely Vedic, of Vedic origin. So he cites passages, Yamuna, in his Agama Pranya from Parma Samhita, Sanat Kumar Samhita, Ishvara Samhita, and Padmodbhava Samhita. Some of the passages cited here from Sanat Kumar Samhita are not traceable in the present printed text. So Ramanuja, 1017 to 1137 AD, who inherited the tradition of Yamuna, interprets the sutra of the Utpatiya Sambhava Adhikarana, which is this part that we just talked about, those four sutras. It's an adhikarana, or it's a section on a particular subject. So before we move to another subject, that subject of the Pancharatra comes in the Brahma Sutras in 4 sutras. So that's called the Utpatiya Sambhava Adhikarana. So on the lines laid down in the Agama Pramanya. So Ramanuja also, in his Shribhashya, he's going to refute Shankara's ideas. He cites passages from the Parama, Paushkara, and Satvara Samhitas. Ramanuja makes frequent mention of the 6 qualities, Sadgunya, which we talked about, whenever God is described. God is to be placed with acts of worship. God enjoys them in the highest place, Nitya Vibhuti, and also the world have facilities for his enjoyment. These are enjoyable objects, bhogya, like the objects of sense organs, instruments, bhogyopakarana, bhogya upakarana, right? Like the sense organs and the places of enjoyment, bhogyasthana, the places of enjoyment, right? Like the 14 worlds and the bodies there. Garlands, chowries, which are yak-tail fans, right? Chowries are called chamaras also. And others come under bhogyopakarana. Quadrangles, courtyards, and halls become bhogyasthana. So we're talking about Vaikuntha here. These, which are thus classified in the Lakshmi Tantra, are mentioned by Ramanuja in the introduction to his Gita Bhasya and also in the Sharanagati Gadya. The 3 kinds of offerings or means of attending upon God are aupacharika, from which we get the word upachara, right, which is service, right, like incense, music, and others. Abhaya vaharika, like achamaniya, right, delicious preparations, etc., and some sparshika, like perfumes, things which are anointed on the Lord. There are mentions in the Ahibudnya Samhita which prescribes the procedure for daily worship. Ramanuja refers to them in a book which he wrote, which is his 9th book called the Nitya Grantha, which again is an anikam for his disciples, right? A manual of worship composed by him where he follows the procedure laid down in the text mentioned above. 6 asanas, or 6 different, the puja, the ija or the archana, the puja of the deity is divided up into 6 sections called asanas, are enjoined to be offered to God at various stages. So what are they? They are mantrasana, shnanasana, alankarasana, punamantrasana, bhojasana, bhojasana, punamantrasana, and payankasana or shayanasana, right? These are the 6 asanas, sadasanas. To the use of the Astra mantra, Mahastraya Pate or Omastraya Pate, right? The Surabhi Mudra, which is the cow udders mudra, right? And the Astanga Namaskara, fully prostrating oneself like a stick, otherwise called as Dandavat Pranams, right? Astanga Pranam, right? Namaskara, which are ordained in the Samhitas, are all mentioned in their proper context in the Nitya Grantha by Ramanuja. So here we're talking about Nitya Grantha by Ramanuja. Definitely has an Agamic Pancharatra Agama influence. It is thus found that the Pancharatra Agama exerted profound influence on Ramanuja. Though the system of Vaishnavism represents the happy blending of the concepts of Godhead with the names Bhagavan, Vishnu, and Narayana, Vasudeva, the Vishishta Dvaita system has been attaching supreme importance to the name Narayana, as is clear from the Mula mantra, right? Tira mantra, Astakshara mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, and the Dvaya mantra, Sriman Narayana Charnosharam Papadi Srimate Narayanaya Namaha. So the word Narayana is the preferred appellation of or name of God, right, in the Pancharatric system. The name Bhagavan is often used to refer to God and also upon along with the name Narayana. This is evident from the opening lines in the Sharanagati Gadya, right, at the end of the Vaikuntha Gadya and in most passages of the Nitya, right? So under the influence of Ramanuja's Nitya, some of the leading exponents of Vishishtadvaita brought out their own manuals called Nitya, so their own anikams, giving guidelines for leading the daily life in conformity with Shastraic injunctions. The ideals of the Vaishnava are set forth here, following the teachings of the Pancharatra Agama. So the Anika Karika of 528 stanzas was composed by Sri Ranganarayanarya, also known as Vangivam Sheshvara, an immediate disciple of Ramanuja. And I have that commentary on, it's more or less, I have that book in Sanskrit, which is more or less, it's a commentary on the Nitya Grantha of Ramanuja. He expects the Vaishnava to resolve to follow the routine based upon the Panchakala Prakriya, which we talked about before, the 5 sections of the day, as laid down in the Pancharatra Agama, speaks of the glory of this routine. He treats each part of this routine, indicating how it is to be observed. Bhuta Shuddhi, the purification of the material elements in the body, and Nyasa, touching different parts of the body with different Mula mantras and Bija mantras, are dealt with in detail. Worship of God is called Ija or Yaga, right? Yaga meaning sacrifice, right? It's Yaga and Yagya mean the same sort of thing. Yaga tends to be a bigger Yaga, Yagya, right? Ija means puja or archana or worship, and therefore is actually taken up. Mental worship is to be undertaken also. This is called Hrid Yaga. Hrid means the heart or the mind. So when we do yaga or worship of the Lord in the mind or the heart, that is called Hrid Yaga or Manasika Puja, right? Along with God, Shri, Bu, and Nila, Sudarshana, Chakra, and other weapons of the Lord, and all his retinue of the Lord must be worshipped as a part of the ritual. The 6 asanas, or different divisions of the ritual, and the use of Surabhi Mudra, right, in the Bhojasana, offering of the food, right, are indicated, right, in that particular karaka, Anika karaka here, right. So lost are the Abhigamanasara, right, which was written at a request of Vatukapurna by Srivatsanka Mishra, also known as Kurdalwan, foremost of the disciples of Ramanuja. The Nitya of his son, Parasara Bhatta, which I also have in English translation as well. The Nitya of Nanjir, which I don't have, the disciple of Parasara Bhatta. Opinions on these matters, which Narayana Muni, the follower of Srivatsanka Mishra and Parasara Bhatta, Krishna Muni, and Gridharaso Muni, Saro Muni, held, are cited by Vedanta Deshika in his work, Pancharatra Raksha. And if you go on the YouTube site, Vaishnava Dharma International, you'll find that there are a series of, there's a playlist and a series of lectures on Pancharatra Agama explained by Dr. Tirunarayana. So not only are their works lost, but very little is known about them otherwise. The Panchastava, which is 5 hymns which are written by Srivatsanka Mishra, the aforementioned Kurtalwan or Kuresha are his other names, right? Contain 5 stotras. So these 5 stotras are also very, very important, and they're influenced by the Pancharatra Agama, and they're very, very important philosophical stotras. Sri Stava, Atmanus, Atimanusha Stava, Vardaraja Stava, Sundara Bahustava, and Vaikuntha Stava. These are the 5 stavas called Panchastavas, right, or Panchastotras. Among these, the Vardaraja Stava and the Sundara Bahustava are intended to sing the glory of Lord as enshrined in Kanchipuram and Tirumalirancolai near Madurai, Tirumalirancolai near Madurai, respectively. So that place near Madurai, Kanchipuram refers to the Vajraj Perumal temple in Madurai, in Kanchipuram. The one near Madurai is called also Aligar Kovil, right? Or Kovil Aligar. It's Sundara. The name of the deity there is Sundaraja Perumal, which is why the stotra is called Sundaraja Bahustava, Sundara Bahustava. It's about the beautiful form of the Lord there, right? It's a Vaikanasa temple, actually, interestingly enough. Anyway, it's very nice place. That it's also it's on a hill, which is also holy to Kartikeya, and there's a spring on the hill which people bathe in who follow Kartikeya. But anyway, it's a great Vaishnava shrine just outside of Madurai. The deity from that shrine goes into Madurai to give away his sister in marriage at the Kalyanotsava of the Meenakshi Sundareshwara temple in Madurai, which is the most most famous temple there, Devi temple, in that part of India. Okay, so actually there's like a golden triangle of Hinduism in that area, right? You have basically the big temple in Tanjore of Shiva, the big temple of Vishnu in Srirangam, and the big temple of Devi in Madurai, like that. These are in one very small area like that. So it's very interesting. Okay, so anyway, just an aside, that the archer form or the deity form of God is glorified in these two stotras, again, the Vardaraja Stava and the Sundarabahu Stava, right? Cannot be held to be due to the direct influence of the Agamas. Even before 1000 AD, this form of God was quite popular. Indeed, from ever since the Alwaz wrote, they offered their worship to God, whose form as an icon in the temple was not introduced by them, but was already there for worship. So the Sadgunya aspect, the 6 different qualities of the Lord, main qualities of the Lord, the splitting up of the 6 qualities into 3 pairs. One pair is shared by each of the 3 deities, not that, so Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. So Vasudeva shows all the 6 qualities in full. The others have the 6 qualities in full, but they emphasize each one of them 2 of the 6 qualities. So 2, 4, 6. Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. And the importance of the doctrine of property, together with its practical aspects, are admirably treated in these 5 poems. Again, the 5 Panchastavas or the Panchastotras by Kurutalwan, right? Inability to measure the greatness of Shri is humorously depicted thus. In that stotra there from Shri Stava, we can look it up and we can find out what it means. Like that. And continuing on, we're just going to talk about as it is really immeasurable, right? What is immeasurable? The greatness of Goddess Shri, the greatness of Mahalakshmi, right? It does not detract from the omniscience of the Lord, and Shri not to know its measure, as their omniscience cannot know the non-existence, like a sky lotus. Okay, so there's a saying in Sanskrit. There's a few different sayings. One is a sky lotus. So a lotus grows in the water. It cannot grow in the sky. So when you say a sky lotus, it's like a unicorn. It's something that doesn't exist in real life. Okay, so the idea is that we conceive of God and Sri Devi as being omniscient, or even the souls are understood when they attain liberation to have omniscience. They know everything that can be known. But the question is, if the greatness of the Lord and the greatness of Lakshmi can never be known, because they're so great, right? Right? Then how can they be omniscient because they can't know their own glories like that? So it's sort of a catch-22, what we call a catch-22. So that's why it's described here as a sky lotus. It doesn't exist. They're non-knowing of their omniscience, is their non-knowing of their greatness is a sky lotus, is compared to a sky lotus. So God may be any one of the 5 forms, right? Again, Paravyuha, Vibhava, Antaryami, and Archa. Yet the Archa form, the deity in the temple, has a powerful appeal to the devotees and not the others. Why? Because we can so closely serve and relate to the deity in the temple. The greatness of the Lord and of Shri is well brought out by a careful use of the word Shri in this Varadaraj Stava 18, right? In 2 different senses. So Shri, it can be derived from 2 different verbs, and therefore it has 2 different senses, which we can find out by looking in Mumukshapadi also, where that's explained. Probably Vedanta Deshika also explains it in Rahasya Trayasa, but I haven't seen that yet. But in Mumukshapadi, definitely Pila Lokacharya and Manavala Mamani explain these different things. Here we're seeing that Kurutalwar has spoken about it in his Varadaraj Stava. So as the resort of all and one who resorts to the Lord. So she, Mahalakshmi, is the one who is resorted by everybody. Everybody goes to her and surrenders to her. And at the same time, she is the one who surrenders to the Supreme Lord also. She surrenders to the Supreme Lord. So she's in that middle space as a mediator. Then in the Vaikuntha Stava, verse 29, Parasara Bhatta, and if anybody wants the full of these Panchastavas or Panchaslokas, if you want the full verses and everything with the translations, we can find them and we can send them to you. Just get in touch with us and send us a text or an email. In fact, when I was studying Vaishnavism at Madras University, there was a whole course on these 5 stotras. They're very, very important philosophically. So Parasara Bhatta, the talented son of Srivatsanka Mishra. So he says Srivatsanka Mishra here, we should remember Kuresha or Kuradalwan is the normal name that's used for him, right? But his son, he had 2 sons, Vedavyasa Bhatta and Parasara Bhatta, who were named after Vedavyas and his father, Parasara Muni, right? Which was one of the promises that Ramanuja made to Yamunacharya when he saw his 3 fingers were bent after he came upon Yamuna after he had passed away, his dead body, right? And so these 2 sons of Kuresh, right, are the authors of 2 other fine poems, right? So this Parasara Bhatta, excuse me, not Vedavyas Bhatta, but Parasara Bhatta made also 2 fine poems called Sri Rangarajastava and Sri Guna Ratnakosha, right? So these are 2 other poems by the son of Kuresh. So we talked about Kuresh's Panchastava. Now we're going to talk about these 2 poems of Parasara Bhatta. The deity at Sri Rangam is identified with 4 Vyuha deities, right? Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. He is said to be displaying the eminence of the 4 deities, right? So here in Sri Rangarajastava, right, in the Uttara Shataka, which means the second 100 verses, right, that verse 39, right, we have here, it says the 4 deities are to be worshipped as representing the 4 states of consciousness: waking, dream, deep sleep, and transcendence, right? And the Lord at Sri Rangam is identical with them. Vishnu's greatness is due to Lakshmi's, yet the Vedas do not make a separate mention of Sri's greatness because it gets included within that of the Lord and her lover, right? Her lover. Then in Sri Guna Ratnakosha, right, by Parasara Bhatta, we're talking about, right? Sometimes Parasara Bhatta is just called Bhatta. So some people will call him as just Bhatta, right, like that. But he's one of the sons of Kuresha, as said above. The above mentioned 2 writers, meaning Parasara Bhatta and his father, Kuresha, right, are thus seen to have been greatly influenced by the Pancharatra traditions, particularly the treatment of Sri's greatness or Mahalakshmi's greatness. Perhaps they were directly indebted to Yamuna's 4 slokas on Sri Devi called Chatusloki. So Parasara Bhatta is the author also of the Bhagavad Guna Darpanam, which is a commentary on the Vishnu Sahasranama Stotra, which we have. Anybody wants that, that can be downloaded. It's translated into English. And it's a philosophical commentary on the 1,000 names of Vishnu, because as I said, not only the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras, but also the Bhagavad Gita and also the Vishnu Sahasranam were the main philosophical tenets of all the Vedanta schools, like that. So Sri Vaishnavas have the commentary on that, not by Ramanuja, but by Parasara Bhatta, the son of his greatest disciple, Kuresha. Like that. While explaining some of the names in Vishnu Sahasranam, he cites passages from Vishnu Tattva, Brahma Samhita. That's not the Brahma Samhita that the Gaudiyas talk about, which is of a later creation, right? Like that. This is the Pancharatra Agama called Brahma Samhita, Sattvada Samhita, and Paushkara Samhita, commenting on the name Vararoha, right, which comes in the Vishnu Sahasranam, which means one who has attained his own eminent position. The author refers to the Vyuha doctrine of Pancharatra. The Bhagavatas hold that Pada Brahman is of 3 kinds: Pada, Vyuha, and Vibhava. He interprets Vibhava as appearance or manifestation of the Lord at his will. This is of 4 kinds, namely, 1, that which is directly assumed like those of Matsya Kurma and others, right, Vibhava avatars, that in which he inspires specific persons like Parashurama, Krishna Dvaipayana, and others who are Shaktavesha avatars, right? Right. Number 3, that which arises through his penetrating powers with respect to Puranjana and others, right, which we read about in the Bhagavad Purana and other Puranas. And 4, that by descent in some individual forms as the Archavigraha, so self-manifest deities that have come in this material world. So there are 8 famous self-manifest deities in India, but there are also others which are said to be self-manifest. So those 4 appearances of the Lord, right, in different appearance is twofold, namely pradurbhava and pradurbhavantara. The latter does not mean another pradurbhava, but what is different from it. The difference between the two lies in the former displaying the Lord's personal activity and the latter coming under the control of only a fraction of the Lord's activity, right? So in the case of a Shaktivesh avatar, for example, Rudra is held to be, Rudra Shiva is held to be the pradurbhavantara, is considered to be like a Shaktivesh avatar. So because he is fully dependent on the Lord's glory, those who desire to get moksha are required to worship the pradurbhava and not the pradurbhavantara kind. Okay? So we should worship the forms of the Lord that are the direct forms of the Lord, Vishnu Tattva, and not those which are Jiva Tattva or are empowered forms, like that. The author cites passages from the Sattvara and Paushkara Samhitas to support that view, that doctrine. The 4 Vyuha deities and Sadgunya are referred to while explaining the names Mahatapas twice, Chatuvyuha, Atindriya, Mahadyuti, Aniyadesha Vapus, Ahasamvartaka, and Chaturmurti. These are all in Vishnu Sahasranama. The functions of the individual deities of the Vyuha are referred to while interpreting the names Sarvavid, Vishvakseno, and Veda. Veda Vidavyango, Vedango, Vedavid Kavahi, right? So the name of the Lord as Sattvatam Patihi is explained to have a bearing on the Sattvata system. Property is referred to while explaining the name Sannyasakrit, because Nyasa Vidya from the Upanishads means property. So when we hear Sannyasakrit in Vishnu Sahasranama, it's referring to property. Sudarshana, the discus of the Lord, gets glorified. It gets a glorified description in the Sudarshanastika of Kura Narayana Jiyat. So there was one Swami called Kura Narayana, in which 74 stanzas describe the discus or the Sudarshana. So we finished with the Vishnu Sahasranama by Parasara Bhatta. Now we're talking about the Sudarshana Astika of Kura Narayana Jiyat, right? So in 74 stanzas describes the discus in all of its parts, and 27 depict the greatness and appearance of the person of Sudarshana. The divine couple Lakshmi Narayana, Lakshmi Narayanaya, Narayanakyam, Mitunam means the coming together of Lakshmi and Narayana, is said to be carefree, entrusting the security of the world to the person of Sudarshana. This suggests the influence of the account of the greatness of Sudarshana, which comes in Arhibudna Samhita. Vatsavaradacharya, also known as Nadadur Ammal, right, who was the uncle, I believe, maternal uncle of Vedanta Deshika, as a leading exponent of Vishishtadvaita in the 13th century, gave an exposition on the doctrine of property, which can be read in translation. It is called Prapana Parijata, right, comprising of 10 sections. At the outset, the author proves that this doctrine is authentic and cites the Lakshmi Tantra and Sanat Kumar Samhitas, and quotes passages from the Vishvaksena Samhita to support his standpoint. With the aid of these passages, the nature of the doctrine is expounded. The same text and Lakshmi Tantra are cited in a discussion on who is qualified for this means, for the means of property. Both the learned and unlearned are qualified to take up these means. So everybody is qualified to take up the property, right? So there's a quote here from Lakshmi Tantra, chapter 17, verses 101 to 102, that the preceptor can take man across worldly life is explained on the authority of Jayakya Samhita. A prapana must lead his life rendering service to God. Branding the shoulders with the heated conch and discus is the external mark. The internal mark consists of the heart being free from passion, speech devoid of falsehood or lies, and the body, physical motion, right, freed from doing injury to others, right? So compassion for all living beings and non-injury, ahimsa, right? So this is explained in the Prapana Parijata by Nadaduramo, also known as Vatsavaradacharya, right? The uncle of Vedanta Deshika. On the authority of Shonaka, the author recommends worship of the Archa Vigraha, deity of the Lord in the temple. He cites the Lakshmi Tantra and Vishwaksena Samhita in support of his exposition of the ethical way of life, which a Prapana should pursue on the strength of the Dharma Shastras and Pancharatra texts, and which he should avoid. And what he should also avoid, right? So finally, the author insists that a Prapana should not swerve from the ideals expected of him according to the constituents of property. The way of life led according to those principles will take him to the cherished goal. This text is a magnificent exposition on property, is mainly based on the Pancharatra Agama. The 5 forms of God are described, one in each stanza, by Vatsavaradacharya in his hymn of praise called Paratva Dipankshana, right? Among these, Vyuha Vasudeva is described first. Though the Lord is the minutest among the minute and the largest amongst the large, he is the size of the thumb as Antayami and visualized by the yogins. Now, Sudarshana Suri, the grandson of the brother of Parasura Bhatta, became the disciple of Vatsavaradacharya or Nadadulamal, right? And commented on Sri Ramanuja's Sri Bhashya in his Shrut Prakashika, which I mentioned before, which is a commentary on Sri Bhashya, in the Utpatya Sambhava Adhikarana, which deals with Pancharatra. He offers the clear exposition of the Vishishtadvaita point of view. The Mahabharata mentions that the Sattva Dharma disappeared several times and was revealed again for mankind by Narayana. This shows that this Dharma is beginningless like the Vedas, which too have been revealed from time to time. It was revealed on the Mount Meru, and several sages became its promulgators. This shows the sanctity of the place where it was revealed, that the sages had unanimous regard for the system taught to them, that is the Pancharatra Agama. That King Vasu adopted it is enough evidence to show the eminent persons who took to it. The system is helpful for pursuing the 4 aims of life, or Purusharthas, which are Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, right? As the Pancharatra texts claim that it is equal to the 4 Vedas, and as it is called Mahopanishad, in other words, the Pancharatra Agama. The Varaha Purana has the following passage regarding the mantras for worshipping the Lord. So here it's in passage in 56, chapter 56, verse 11 of the Varaha Purana, right? This indicates that the mantras enjoined in the Pancharatra are as valid as those in the Vedas, thus declaring that the Agama is on a par with the Vedas. The authority of the Vedas requires corroboration from the Itihasas, right, which are the epics, which is Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the Puranas, like Vishnu Purana, the Sattvic Puranas, let's say, right, like Vishnu Purana and Bhagavad Purana, Garuda Purana, etc. Likewise, the validity of the Ekayana Shaka, the original branch of the Vedas, gets strengthened on the authority of the passages in the Puranas and Itihasas, which glorify the Sattvata Dharma, right, the way of the Sattvatas or the Pancharatrins or the Bhagavatas. The name Bhagavan is stated to denote only Vasudeva. The author shows that the Pancharatra system has an individuality which validates it, unlike Sankhya, Yoga, Pasupata, and other systems, right? It has validity. Besides, the Vedas contain a number of eulogistic passages, Artavad, right, which are completely absent in Pancharatra texts. While interpreting the Sutra 2241 of Brahma Sutras, Sudarshana Suri writes that absolute distinction is not meant between the 4 Vyuha deities, and as such, the rise of one from another cannot be objected to, as there is something specific in the effect which is not generally traceable to the cause. Even so, there is some speciality in the possession of a specific form and the ornaments by each of the Vyuha deities. So they're all related to each other. So there can't be an objection if you say one comes from the other, it emanates from the other. An objection is noted to the effect that Sankhya, Yoga, Pasupata, and Pancharatra systems should be considered to have been condemned alike. the author rejects this on the ground that all the four systems cannot be refuted on one and the same ground, as they are mutually opposed to each other, right? All of these, yoga, Sankhya, Pasupada, Pancharatra, they're all opposed to each other. Since Narayana is held to be the greatest deity in the Pancharatra and is treated as distinct from the other, it should be treated as distinct from the other three systems. Passages from the Kalottara Samhita are cited by the author, that is Sudarshana Suri. Pila Lokacharya, a contemporary of Sudarshana Suri, right, wrote a number of works and is an author of Prapana Paritrana on the duties. This is one of his 18 Rahasya Granthas of Pila Lokacharya, also probably available, on the duties and responsibilities of a Prapana and of the Tattvatraya, which is also available in translation. Tattvatraya means the three truths, right, with Tattva, Hita, and Purushartha. Right, on tattvas, the insentient and the sentient form of God. So Tattvatraya is talking about not Tattva, Hita, and Purushartha, but it's talking about the three things: Chit, Achit, and Ishvara, right? God, the souls, and the world. Right, these are the three tattvas, right, in Vedanta. God's five forms are mentioned in the latter, in the Tattvatraya. So we also have done a series of discussions on Tattvatraya on the YouTube channel Vaishnava Dharma International. The qualities and the functions of each of the viewer deities are explained. The main and subsidiary kinds of vibhavas, right, emanations from the viewers, are listed and are shown to be such at his free will. The number of vibhavas is stated as 36, right? So in some of the Samhitas, there were 39, I believe, and we had different numbers, right? So here it's 36, right? Among the five forms, the archer is perfect, right? The deity in the temple is perfect, since that alone creates affection amongst the people for the Lord, in the auspicious form and the refuge of all the worlds, and could be enjoyed, right? Because it's so easily accessible. This work deserves to be called a collection of the Pancharatra Sutras, right? So this is a Prapana Paritrana and Tattvatraya by Pila Lokacharya. In another work, Srivachana Bhushana, which we also have a series on in a playlist series on in the YouTube channel. In another work, Srivachana Bhushana, Pila Lokacharya states that the Alvars perform the surrender of themselves property to the archer, to the deity form of God. He brings out vividly the distinction between the five forms of God. The Antaryamin form is like the water in the deep earth. The Paramatma or the super soul is like water that's kept within the ground, like very far down. The Paratva is like water encircling the material universe. The Vyuha form is like that in the ocean, Milky Ocean water. The Vibhava form is like the floods, the occasional flash floods that come, right? The water that is flooded from flooded rivers that only happens certain times. If you're there for that particular avatar, you can see it. And the archer is the one which is settled in deep ponds. So amongst them, the last one is within the reach of people. So these other waters are not available to reach for people, only the water that's right there in front of them, while others are not. Right. So those who take to property may be ignorant like us, or great in their knowledge, like the early preceptors, or those who are devoted to God, like the Alvars. Property is based on the feeling of one's miserable nature, karpanya, right? That's called karpanya, one of the 6 aspects of property, right? And is an indication of helplessness. It is in fact not a means. It's not a means in itself, like bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga. It's not a means by itself, but only faith in the grace of the Lord, and the Lord himself is the means. So the Lord is himself the upaya, the means, and the upaya, the goal. To get his grace, the self requires Shri to be the divine Purushakara, or mediatrix, feminine, right, between him and God. Shri intercedes on behalf of the self and pleads that he be forgiven. At the same time, she extends her infinite tenderness to the self. The grace which he shows then is spontaneous and does not arise from any cause, nor does it require any personal endeavor on the part of the self. Human initiative as a condition for redemption is not required. To adopt it as means would be like a son making a request to his father to protect him. right? It's like an insult for the son to ask the father to protect him. The father's natural position is to protect the children. So if the children ask to be protected, it's like an insult for the father, like that. So similarly, we don't have to ask to be protected by God. Naturally, he's going to protect us. We are his property. Right. So to adopt it as a means would be like a son making a request to the father to protect him. God himself would arrange to get what is good for the self and to avoid what is harmful for him. What the self is required to do is to know himself, to know that one is a servant of the Lord, is a slave of the Lord, and not to stand in the way of the Lord showering his grace. Bhakti and property follow as necessary corollaries from the grace of the protector of the Supreme Lord. In the second chapter of his work, the author discusses the nature of svagata svikara and paragata svikara and the difference between them. The former refers to the Lord's accepting the prapana, who makes an endeavor for this purpose, svagata svikara, who goes himself to him. And then paragata svikara, the latter means that prapana is accepted by the Lord on account of his own free will. Right? So Swagata Shrikara is the Lord accepts and saves people who resort to the Lord and surrender to the Lord. And then Paragata Swikara means he can save people who didn't even surrender to him. Out of his own free will, he can save people. Right? The former never assures the result, and the latter is ever fruitful. The divine grace got through the latter method is like mother's milk, while that in the former is like artificial milk. Besides, conceit and pride would overpower the self while taking to the former and would affect adversely the nature of the self, namely its abject dependence on the Lord. The next two sections discuss the attitude which the self should adopt towards the God and the Acharya.
You spoke about Nitya, and you said that they never came to the material world. So my question,
Nityas.
So my question is, how do we consider Hanuman as Nitya Suri, even though he was here on the material world?
No. Nityas can come here if they have a purpose. If God sends them, they can come.
Okay.
So no, nityas are they're never here covered by ignorance. That's the thing.
So the idea is that even though they come in the material world, they are eternally liberated. Am I correct?
Yeah, when the Lord comes himself, like when Lord comes as Rama, then he's there. He brings people from Sri Vaikuntha. His servants also appear.
Okay, I understand. Nice. And I have another question. So which one is older? Is Pancharatra older or Vaikhanasa older?
It's difficult to say, but Vaikhanasa doesn't need to be presented as being authentic, because it's accepted as being authentic because it's so Vedic in nature, whereas Pancharatra was criticized by Shankara and by other people because it's considered to be non-Vedic in nature. So that's why it was criticized. So that's all. But specifically, Sri Vaishnavas mostly are following Pancharatra like that. Vaikhanasa is also a system of worshiping the Lord, but it's not open to everybody. It's only open to people born in particular families, and so there's lots of there's a lot more Vedic mantras used. So, but there are books on it. I mean, we can have a look at some of the books on it, but it's not practical for us or for most people.
Okay. Thank you. And one other question I have, which is not too much related to what you spoke about, but about, do we have any shastric process of repairing a broken deity, or is it that all broken deities must be taken out?
Yes. So there's a thing called Jirna Pratishta, which means basically renovation of a deity or replacement of a deity. In some cases, the deity has to be totally replaced. In some cases, if there's a very slight problem with the deity, it can be repaired. And in the case of a self-manifest deity, sometimes the deity is kept. Even Lord Venkateshwara is a self-manifest deity in Tirupati, but he has a crack or a
Right.
break from a leela that occurred,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
in his chin. So they put a bandage on it. They put a camphor bandage on it.
Camphor. Yeah. Okay. Very nice. But where can I get my hands on some material of that?
About fixing deities. Okay, so
Yeah.
we can look in the Hari Bhakti Vilas in the 19th Vilas or 19th chapter, right at the end, at about sloka 1000. And you can look at it's called Jina Pratistha, and there's only a few verses that explain about it. But if you want to go into more detail about it, the Pancharatra talks about how the installation has to be redone. The Pitam, if it's an immovable deity, the Pitam has to be rejected and a new Pitam has to be brought, and the deity has to be consecrated again. Even if it's a movable deity, the deity may have to be consecrated again. So there's different rules and regulations in the different samhitas about it.
Okay. But what about a home deity that is being worshipped in the house?
Either home deity or temple deity.
Okay. Because why I asked that is our Radha that we worship in our house, her hand was broken, but because my family members and myself we're so attached to this form,
But it's
we didn't
a
want to take it out.
stone deity. It's a stone deity.
She's marble, yes.
Yeah, so usually in the house we don't have stone deities anyway. So
Right.
so
Yeah.
it won't be covered in Pancharatra, because in Pancharatra it'll say it'll only talk about stone deities that are broken in the temple. So you'll have to follow either the temple method of procedure or whatever it is, or you have
Yeah.
to adapt.
Om Namo Narayanaya. Om